Well, good morning, and you know, it's great to be a part of the family of God because you don't need a lot of pressure. You know, you just friends, you just work away at it. And that's what the country church is all about. So it was a little stressful. We were trying to convert from a Mac to a Windows. Ashley, thanks for coming home.
We're all standing in tech support.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's very good. So we were just having trouble getting the connection, but we've got lots of it here now, and there's the. And of course, as any engineer, you know, it would be appropriate to have your trusty little PowerPoint thingy with you. It's in there somewhere. There we are, look at that, laser beam. Is it working? Yeah, it's working. Oh, yes, we're good. Okay, one more little check here. So, well, thank you for coming this morning. You know, it was an opportunity. I had worn the sports jacket for like 9 months now? 10 months, almost a year. And it was an opportunity to put one on, but I may not keep it on. They seem kind of foreign now to wear, much to Marcia's chagrin. So I'm going to talk obviously about the trip to Israel that I went on at the end of May this past year. And it was really an eye-opening experience for sure. I don't know how many people have been to Israel. Anyone here? So, all right, so you can correct me then if I go astray here in any way. But I went as part of a delegation, a Canadian delegation that was supported by CIFA, and CIFA is the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And they're an advocacy group for the Jewish people across the world, but certainly in Israel. And so we'll start on the first slide, and I'm going to have to wink or nod, as Kim said. There should be another first slide. There we go. That was a group. There were about 20 of us, and there were people from all over the country that went, and from various walks of life. And I had met the individual that was organizing this back when I was in government, and we obviously were supporting Israel as our government, and it was, and then we got to know each other, and so we had this opportunity to go, and I very much appreciated that. So moving along to show the size of Israel. So if you look at this, you see how small a country that Israel actually is, right here. Surrounded by Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And if you look at this, 22,000 roughly square kilometers. That's a third the size of New Brunswick, with a population of about 10 million. A population that has grown by 3 to 4 million since 1948, when it became a country, once again. So going to the next slide just gives you the idea of the approximate size I'm showing. The next one gives you just the size, how big it is in terms of it's 290 miles long. The 3 days there is walking it, not so much in a car. 470 kilometers, but a very kind of narrow piece of land wedged in, which was formerly known as Palestine and formerly known as Israel many years before that. I'm going to try to go through some chronology of time, but also go through some of what I've seen there and some of the pictures leading up to that. And I'll go as long as I see people's eyes open. What time? So I did 30 minutes, but we got to keep moving. So Jerusalem, the Holy Land. So everyone knows that, but here's the exact, kind of going through a few pictures. The next in terms of the walls around Jerusalem. The wars that have gone through over centuries and centuries because of the religious conflict is astounding. I mean, what we saw there, they have visuals in the City of David where they actually go through the history, and it's just unbelievable what turmoil has been in the Middle East over centuries and thousands of years. Looking through in the streets of Israel, old Jerusalem rather, so you see the housing. About 1 million people live in the Jerusalem area. Going through the walkways and the halls around, keep moving, Kim, we'll just keep rolling along. Right here. Now, I want to talk about, this is inside the walls of the old Jerusalem. Walls that have been built and rebuilt by past and former kind of dictators or people that were in power at the time. So you have 3 main quarters. So this is kind of the center of which was so unique walking through the streets, and all of a sudden now you're in the Muslim quarter, you're in the Jewish quarter. And as you can see, and then, does this show up well enough so people can read it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the Muslim quarter, I'll talk about the Dome of the Rock, the Jewish quarter, Christian quarter, primarily Catholic, the Christians, the Armenian quarter, and the Armenians have really kind of started way back when, and so they still have a quarter that's identified. But this gives you the importance of this section and the religious I won't call it harmony, but they live together here in this area. Jerusalem is about 40% Arabs at this point and 60% Jews. Okay, moving along into the pictures, if you look at the number of Jews that are actually Christians, about 2%, which is kind of an interesting stat, you know, when you get to see that. This is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, and when you look at this, it's basically the area of, was considered to be the retaining wall of the first temple. The temple has been destroyed once, twice, and I'll talk about it here because now there's discussion about a third temple, and the third temple is talked about in prophecy that there will be a third temple. Here's the actual notes that are put into the walls of the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, and these are messages to God. Does anyone know what is done with these? Because they're a direct message to God, no one reads them. Well, no one's supposed to read them. And they have an etiquette where they actually take these out and they bury them in the Mount of Olives twice a year. But never read them because they're addressed to God. When you look here at the next, the families, Orthodox Jews are the fastest growing population. And one of the controversies in Israel right now is that the families of the Orthodox Jews, most don't work, if none work. They're having huge families, and they don't participate in Israeli Defense Force, as every other Jewish family does. They are part of a 3-year program when they graduate from school. And so what is happening here is this very strong religious right is having a major influence on the democracy of Israel. And that is part of, but there's a controversy there because of the workforce, but they're growing large families. And I just showed the example of that. So looking here at this picture is the actual, the Muslim sector, and the Temple Mount is where this is built. So I'm going to talk about that as we move on a little further, but that is the epicenter because that is on the site of the original Jewish temple. And so you may have heard some recent discussions about that because in prophecy it'll talk about the third temple, and right now artifacts are being built in the area that would be placed in the temple. So there's a lot of move afoot to put that, but that's in a powder cave location, and it will cause some major disruption. Moving along to the next, I'm showing just a bit of the flavor. So I'm going to run through a little bit now of what it looks like in Jerusalem and then on throughout Israel. So the markets, you know, lots of food. You can see we were well fed. And it was constant. In this case, the mayor of Jerusalem, the former mayor, was speaking to us. That was quite common. We had a very tight agenda. It wasn't exactly a tourist trip. It was an information trip. But there were no tourists because we were a small group, about 20 of us, but there weren't any bus lines. The tour guide that we had that was focused on our trip, this was his second outing this year, and this was in May. And the reason people weren't flying, the commercial flights were canceled 2-3 days before we went. And it looked like our trip was off, but we had quite a dedicated crew that said, oh no, we're going. And so we ended up with basically going to Barcelona and then taking an Israeli airline to Tel Aviv. And when we got into Tel Aviv about 2 in the morning, within a half an hour of being there, the sirens went off. And we ended up going to a shelter. And that's not, well, here, we're breaking into this real fast. But the idea was certainly that was a way of life. And people were hearing sirens every day. And they were, it became like, okay, there's a siren, what do we do? There's shelters everywhere. The idea is you're supposed to go to a shelter, and then within the all clear, you're out and back on the street within maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So the Bedouins, I don't know if anyone has a picture of Bedouins in life in their own mind, but this probably fits that picture. And can you imagine when a sheep gets out in the morning what they think they're going to eat? I mean, I just was shocked to look at it. Well, how do they survive here? And because it's desert land all around them. This is outside of Israel, outside of Jerusalem rather, heading towards different sections of the country. But it was quite something. But of course, no trip in Israel will be complete without a camel. And so this was a token camel that was there for tours, and the poor lad hadn't really had anybody ride him for quite some time. There were no tour buses around. We were kind of one of the only ones. And they said it's devastating. Places were closed, like shops and things, because the war was on and people didn't dare go. But we never felt unsafe. At any point in time, we never felt unsafe. Now, if you've been there, you probably guess what this is. Jordan River. So it looks like this because it normally has a lot of water coming out of the Sea of Galilee. And because of water supply, they turned that tap off. And Israel now is making, they're bringing water out of the Mediterranean Sea. The desalination plants are huge. They're irrigating everywhere, and they're taking less and less water from the Sea of Galilee, which is helpful in that sense. This was actually a baptismal site, so we'll move to the next one. There's a little bit of a video here, if this will play.
The light of the world, and as your finger, baptize you, in the name of the Father, and of the Holy Spirit.
So 3 of our colleagues, Western colleagues, wanted to experience getting baptized in I think they may have been baptized before, or maybe not, but the pastor was with us. And so they did do that. But I was surprised to see it, such a small area. Normally, buses would be lined up, and this area would be completely packed with people waiting to be baptized, and waiting just to get in to see the Jordan River. So dates are a big part of their export crops, and this is, again, going along the highway. You see, very, very fertile areas. And it's all because they have a tremendous irrigation system that works. This is the Sea of Galilee. And it looks like any other resort area when we drove into it, except the temperatures would be in the heat of the summer about 46 degrees Celsius. It was hot while we were there, very hot. And so another shot, it's the Sea of Galilee. It's like it's one of the freshwater lakes in Israel. And certainly it is very, very clear, clean water. This was on where the Sermon on the Mount took place, and Peter walking in the water, and there's a monument there, as a statue here, as you can see, of Jesus and Peter. There was a church there, but they said in many cases here, we think this is where the Sermon on the Mount was given. But there are many mounts around the Sea of Galilee. And you found the same thing in Jerusalem. Like, was this the actual site of the crucifixion? Was this a site where Jesus was buried? And there's 2 conflicting reports about where it actually was. So there were certainly, it's a long time ago, and conflicting records were there. This is a resort on the Dead Sea. Now it looks like any other resort, except you're going along and there's nothing but desert. And all of a sudden, poof, here's this resort. Now, if you look further, you can see that it's like any other resort in many ways, except that's a chlorinated pool, which was very refreshing. But there's other pool, which we're in. So you can see we're floating here, because I'm floating there, and you're sitting there like you're on an air mattress. And I mean, it's hot, the sand will burn your feet getting to it, and the water is very warm, and you just lay there, like. Wow, this is really. So when I got back to the lake here, I planned to do that, and I stuck my stone. So I guess it is different in that sense. I took this shot simply to contrast. Oh, I didn't take it. I took it offline, but I took several. But what I wanted to contrast here was the number of cranes. So all these sticks here that are lit up are cranes. And I took count 20 as we passed by one road looking into Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the 2nd largest city, about 550,000, but the fastest growing city and one of the richest cities in the world. But very vibrant. You would not see Tel Aviv any differently than you would look at New York or Toronto or Montreal or a major city in North America, because it's very modern, and that's the differences are things like here. The market we saw had a picture of it, but this particular, here's a guy strolling down on a hot afternoon with his machine gun at his side. So he's obviously a trained IDF and Israeli Defense Force officer or a fighter, but they cannot leave their guns at home. When they're off and leave, they have to wear their guns and take them, or completely dismantle them and take parts out of them so no one can put them together. So this is a typical shelter, this little shelter. And those are everywhere. So typically when Gaza, when the Hezbollah or Hamas would fire rockets, people would hear them, the rockets would be over, the Iron Dome was in business, they were shooting down rockets, you know, left, right, and center, and people would run into a shelter. Now that worked and was quite effective until October 7th, 2023. And October 7th, 2023 is when the worst massacre on the Jewish population happened since the World War II. And in this case, what the picture is here was a concert site not far from the Gaza border. And when I asked the question, would any Gazans be at this concert? They said, oh, of course not. And it seems so strange to me to think that here's all these young people, these are all 20, 30 somethings, maybe 40, and they had this outdoor concert, about 3,500 people. In the massacre, what happened was Hamas actually had built over 250 kilometers of tunnels underground into Israel. And they actually had, there's fences and barricades, and I'll show you some pictures of some of the areas that were attacked. But they came in, broke down the fence lines, came in with really strategic to take out all of the assets that were any sort of watch or surveillance or areas that were guarded. And this concert was on. They killed over 1,400 people at this concert. And these are all pictures on that site of people, young people that were killed. And I mean killed in the most brutal fashion. And so that started the current conflict. And the next slide shows, when we keep moving to this lady right here, this young woman was at that concert and left for dead. And had she not been unconscious by the rifle butt that had hit her in the back of the head, and she fell on the ground, she was bleeding, they thought they killed her, and when she woke up, she had dead bodies on her, because her friends around her had been shot or killed in one manner or another. She was telling her story at this location about the massacre that night. And that's what you see over and over again in Israel, is the commitment of the Jewish people to do their part to protect the nation. And give up their lives, whatever it takes, to stand. And young people that came and presented to us that are in special programs in terms of what they're going to do, the mission they're on to save the nation is really admirable. This was a kibbutz. I don't know how many people know what a kibbutz is. All right, we got good. But I didn't know what a kibbutz was until I got there. So a kibbutz is actually a farming community of several houses, and they have a manager of the community, and all these people live in the different houses. In this kibbutz here, there were 259 homes. 253 of them were burned, and the people inside massacred. And if we move on to there's an inside of a home. And what was especially different here, if they weren't in their home, when the rockets went off first, because that's what happened first. When the rockets went off first, they ran to their shelters, because they never had a ground attack before. Well, guess where the terrorists found them? Grouped in their shelters, and shot them and killed them as they broke down doors in their shelters. This was a surveillance site, and here you can see the actual monitors. So there were, in the next slide, we're showing more of the actual surveillance sites. So there are people, young officers, that were monitoring the actual activities at all the key entrance points. And the slide I showed on the kibbutz and looking out over the farmer's field, that Gaza was only like 3 or 4 kilometers away. I don't want to go back to it, but you could see at that time we were there, the bombs dropping over there. But they broke through the lines over at that site, at the strip or the fencing was, and then they came across in trucks and attacked these communities. And you'd go through, and it would break your heart, because you'd go through here and you'd see pictures. So the next slide, moving on, if we go to, keep right on moving past these, there. These are the officers, no, not that far. Or maybe we're in, oh wow, we're a long ways away. One more, there. This one, these are the officers that were killed at that location. A couple of them actually got away, but the rest were killed right there, burned at the site because they couldn't get in, so they burned the location, and then they, as you saw. And the interesting thing is, it was obvious that Israel were starting to believe that we're going to be able to cohabitate to some degree. I think it was 60,000 Palestinians were working in Israel every day. So they were coming across the border, had visas to work, and more were needed because they were building so fast in Israel proper. So going to the next slide is a case of hostages that are left. Now, at this point in time, there's reported to be 40 or 50, but only maybe 20 that are living. So the challenge right today is, when you hear so much about this on television, and it's you know, to see the starvation, but to hear, okay, how much of the starvation are movies or videos that we see versus how much food is being dropped in, and what are we getting for the full story? And yes, there's a mix here of both, where we have certainly a large amount of people that are suffering greatly. But Hamas are living within the group, and the challenge is, it would stop tomorrow if Hamas would say, okay, I don't want our people to suffer anymore, I'm done fighting, here, we're laying down our arms, the war would stop tomorrow. But it's a big dilemma of what do you do with these, because the history will show, since 1948, when Israel became a country, there have been multiple wars. And then if we move on to the next slide, we're looking at what is Israel concerned about. World War II, 6 million Jews were killed. Now if you go to the next slide, here's the biggest enemy for Israel right in the Middle East. It's Iran. And Iran are funding Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And so they have given, you know, death to Israel. They basically, those different groups are proxies of Iran, and they're funded, so they do the dirty work, so to speak. So the whole discussion around Iran having nuclear weapons is a real threat. And Israel's concern is what happened in World War II took years. Atomic bomb dropping in Israel takes hours, and it could wipe out as many people. So they're very, very focused on not having nuclear weapons, military weapons in Iran's capability. So this is going into the Bible, talking about prophecy. So what I want to end up with here, and I think we're working along on schedule pretty good. I wanted to end up with where we are today, with what prophecy would relate to. So here's this in Deuteronomy 7:6-11. Why did Jesus choose the actual Jews as the chosen people? What was the logic for that? So here in Deuteronomy it says, "For you are the holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all peoples on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all peoples. But because the Lord loves you, and because you would keep the oath of which he swore to your fathers, the Lord has brought you out of the mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt." So it wasn't through any great belief that, you know, that they were great people. It was almost, as many articles would talk about Jesus himself, they expected a great leader. That's why there's such conflict, even between the Jews themselves, between who Jesus was and was he really the Messiah? Because they said we expected the Messiah to come with great power and capability, which, you know, the miracles didn't count apparently. And so that was it's still a debate today. So then there was a question of, okay, well, how do we know about the second coming? And so here's a few points that are brought up in that regard. So this is actually from Matthew 24. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." 40 years later, the second temple was destroyed. That temple he's talking about was destroyed by the Romans. Then you go to the next, and we're looking at Ezekiel. "Moreover, the word of the Lord," oops, sorry, oh, I missed mine here, come back. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own ways and deeds. To me, their way was like the uncleanness of a woman in her customary impurity. Therefore, I poured out my fury on them, for the blood they had shed on the land, and for the idols which they had defiled it. So I scattered them amongst nations, and they were dispersed throughout the countries. I judged them according to their ways and their deeds. When they came to the nations, wherever they went, wherever they went, wherever they went, they profaned my holy name. When they said of them, these are the people of the Lord, and yet they have gone out of this land. So basically, the Lord himself said, you're out of here. So what happened for 2,000 years? The Jews were dispersed all over the world. And at the time, well, we're going to get into this in a minute, but in the idea of okay, now, you had Israel, maybe 3000 BC, and then they were there for about 1,000 years, and then they were dispersed around the world. So the Palestinians, set in there because they were there too, but they were there now for 2,000 years. Because the next thing that happened was in 1948, because the Lord said that they would at one point have their own land. So when you look at that, the next says, the nations gather you out of all countries and put you in your own land. So the Lord had made that prophecy that would happen. And in 1948, Israel became its own country. And then so what happened after that? You see the movement back, going to back one, with the disbursement. So everybody's coming back. Population increased by 3 million. Over this period of time since 1948, were the Jewish population. At the time the state was declared, 1948, 90% of the people there were Palestinian, and 10% were Jewish. So when you think of this, in the message that we got out of all this, it's very, very complicated. Because the Palestinians were there 2,000 years as the body that controlled that area. And then a foreign country comes in and says, no, we think we'll make Israel we'll take this over. So you can see how controversial it is if you take the biblical terms right out of it and just say, wow, you can see why the people feel they have a right. And when you see the Jewish quarter and you see how it's set up with the strong religious connections from several sides, everyone has a real claim to this what they believe to be their homeland. So there were several wars, as I mentioned, since 1948. 1967 was one of a key one that had to happen before the next step, and that was basically that Jerusalem at the time of 1948, the split was between both. Jerusalem was split in half between the Arabs and the Jews. In the 47 or 67 war, it became all under Israeli rule. Now they're living together there, as I said, 40-60 split in population. And it's interesting, you walk through, because there's some areas, there's guards there, and you can't walk into this area in the Arab section. And there's security, so certainly around the Wailing Wall, and places security is very tight. So it's an ongoing way of life. But yet they continue to enjoy a way of life that you say, wow, it becomes customary. And even while we were there, the sirens became, another siren. And a war was on. So it was quite different. And we got out just before Iran started attacking, and the whole issue there, we were out about a week before that. So moving on, what we see right today is a preparation for the third temple. And that is going to be a major issue. And there's some questions, I've heard recent comments about, well, is it really the site of the Temple Mount? Because then you go to the next site, here's the Temple Mount. This is the site of the original temple, which everyone believes that's the spot, and where you have, obviously, a very religious Muslim quarter. And that will be a stronghold, but it will be a controversial issue for sure. If it goes, or if and when it goes the next step, if it's determined that is the actual location, because there are artifacts being made, as I mentioned now, that would go into a new temple. So that is under progress right now. So when we think about the conflict And I know here, and we have many cases here, that we're saying, all right, this is inhumane, what's happening. And yes, it is. It's inhumane that terrorism actually would use human shields. Most times when you're fighting an enemy, you know, they're both dressed in military garb and you kind of know who your enemies are. Here you don't know. The massacre in October 7th of 23 that kicked all of this off, this current conflict, was unheard of. It never happened like this in the history of Israel prior to World War II and the genocide that was happening there. Here we have so many people that they're not part of this terrorism group. So many Muslims, so many Arabs, they're not part of this. They don't like this as well. They do feel, the Palestinians, they do feel that there's a right to the land. And so it's not easy. Is there a way to have a two-state solution? I would say under Hamas rule, absolutely not. And Hamas were elected 19 years ago in a democratic election. And they were elected for a 4-year mandate. I don't think that would have worked for me. They're there 19 years. Because after they actually had their first election, they declared no more elections. And so they've been in a dictatorship mode ever since. So to have them come back, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had another vote, they'd get elected again. But to have them come back. But the bright spots that we're seeing in all this, you see that there's several Arab countries that have said Hamas have to be demilitarized, they have to leave Gaza. That's really good. Iran needs to be clear that they cannot have nuclear weapons, and that has to be not just take their word for it. I'm disappointed here in Canada that we haven't put conditions that say, yeah, the genocide, as people would call it, and I don't think Israel is trying to do that. I know that they're sending pamphlets out, because we met with military folks, we met with their foreign affairs, their military leaders, their foreign affairs people, and they will actually send pamphlets out and say, we're going to be in this area today bombing. And it's almost like when they do that now, people go there. The Hamas bring people there, trying to kill more people and show more of a reaction. So, but you can't have a terrorist group, you can't let terrorism win on this, and you can't have a terrorist group that survives this. So the rules around any sort of discussion on a two-state has to be conditional on Hamas surrender being done. And I don't see Iran doing that anytime soon. But there are signs in the Middle East with Syria, with Lebanon, certainly with Saudi, with Egypt, that they're making deals, trade deals, they're making economic deals. And I think there's a general willingness to say, look, we got to stop this fighting here, but this conflict's real. The other area, the West Bank, I didn't mention that, but Israel is basically populating the West Bank. And I think they've taken over about 60 to 70% of the land base there through just population of Jews throughout the West Bank. So that's another little controversial item. I mean, Gaza is really small. So I think what we need to do is be cognizant of, it's really complicated. And there's not an easy solution. I always wonder, that I think more time in terms of understanding prophecy, but I'm sure there's many that can dispute this fact, that fact, and say, well, I'm not sure that that's okay, what it means. But the reality is, it's a hot spot. And the reality is, Israel is fighting for the very culture that we agree with. The protection of human rights, women's rights, the issues that we're saying are sacred to our way of life. Israel's fighting for them. They're the spearhead of this conflict in that regard. And it's for me, it's good to see the U.S. stand up and be counted and make the difference, because they will turn the tide in that sense, despite all the other things they're doing. But we can't underestimate what this loss, if Israel loses this, which I don't anticipate they will, would mean to the rest of the world. And in Canada, we're playing the wishy-washy approach. Sounds good, two-state, yeah, I agree. But the conditions can't be, oh, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, because if you look back in the history of the wars, they have committed to doing this, 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 and this, and it didn't happen. And Hamas has said very clearly, our goal is the eradication of the Jewish people in Israel. No ifs, ands, or buts. They even had it in their mission statement clearly like that for quite a period of time. So I'm going to stop there. We got a family reunion on the go, and we can talk about any of this. And I don't pretend to be an expert in any way. It was an amazing trip. I guess I encourage anyone to see it because it is what it's very, very, very unique, and the conflicts are very, very real. But the resolve and the resiliency of the Jewish nation, the Israeli people, is remarkable, and that's the passion that drives them. So I'm going to close with a quick word of prayer, and I just thank you for the opportunity. Neil, thank you. Kim, actually, thanks much again. And Rachel and I, we were working on this last night, but and she got me a lot farther than I was on my own. You see, I was quite used to coming up and standing on the presentation, but it wasn't one that I put together, and so it makes it difficult. But anyway, thanks so much. I'll just close in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we just ask for wisdom. We ask for guidance, and we ask for wisdom to our leaders who are making international decisions at a time that is so crucial to the future of not only our country, but to nations around the world. There's a time to be heard, there's a time to be bold, there's a time to be strong. And you know, our challenge today we have in many political aspects is trying to please everyone at all times with everything. And our society cannot continue to be strong in that regard. It has to be guided by strength. And Lord, strength, conviction, humility, and passion. In Israel, passion is needed as we guide through this Gaza war. And there needs to be a resolution that is very clear and supported that the arms will be laid down. So we ask for your guidance, we ask for your understanding. We also, Lord, ask that we play our part, as was part of our mission that was going there. We play our part in being a defender of what is right. So let's say we're not pro-Israel, we're not pro-Palestinian. That's not the idea. The issue is we take a position on what is right, what we believe to be right, and what's needed to be right as we go forward. And we hold strong with that. And let it not be a war of personalities, let it be a war of conviction on what we really believe in. We just ask for your blessing. We ask for the opportunity today as we gather as family, and the blessings that we share as family. And we thank each and every one who I know are going to bring great food there for Neil, Kim, in hosting it once again. And it's not easy, and I know how much work that Frida puts into feeding us all. She does it regularly, and she's told Marcia last night that we're all in good shape. So looking forward to this afternoon's discussion. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for everything that we share. We ask in Jesus' name and for your sake. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Blaine. Israel is so important to us biblically, and we thank you for that update.